We've gone international with this episode of the WhatsOnStage podcast because we have a third host from somewhere over the sea, Mr. David Gordon. Welcome to the podcast.
Oh, I thank you. Thrilled to be here. Proud to be asked.
And do you want to introduce yourself to the WhatsOnStage podcast listeners? Because they might hear a bit more of you over the coming weeks and months as well.
It's true. I'm David Gordon. I'm the editor-in-chief of TheaterMania.com in New York City. We are the American sibling publication of What's on Stage, covering, rather than the West End, all things Broadway, off-Broadway, and as much as we can across the United States.
But you were actually in London for the
I was in London last week for the What's on Stage Awards, and I amassed 7 shows in just about 5 days.
I managed to miss you, so I'm really, really sorry not to have met you.
I know, but we're gathering now, and that's all that matters.
Exactly. What were the 7 shows you managed to see?
I saw Great Comet at the Donmar. I saw Faulty Towers, like we were just discussing off recording. I saw Cymbeline at Shakespeare's Globe. I saw The Producers at the Meunier. I saw What We Talk About When We Talk About Anne Frank at the Marylebone Theater in Kyoto at Toho Place, which I saw with Alex.
Yeah. Sorry, Sarah. I actually had another theatre date with David.
Oh, no. That's heartbreaking because we've only managed one theatre date in like 8 years of working together.
And I finished it off with Starlight Express 3 hours before the What's on Stage Awards.
Brilliant.
You just had to hop down on a train to the Palladium from
I took a
Wembley.
car.
Oh,
you
gosh,
see, this is the American attitude. Alex and I, always on the train.
Yeah, I'll just walk it. I'll get a bike, a line bike all the way back. But we should probably introduce ourselves at this point, Sarah, because we've been very lax on that front. We're teaching David some bad habits.
This is a learning podcast for me.
So I will say welcome to this week's instalment of the What's on Stage podcast with me, Sarah Crompton.
And me, Alex Wood.
Alex, I've got to take my hat off to you because since we last talked, we have all experienced the What's on Stage Awards. And I think it's true to say they were a triumph. Everything from my end, sitting in the audience, having a nice time, seemed to go incredibly smoothly. How was it from your point of view backstage, running around?
Well, as listeners of the What's on Stage podcast will know, there was always the risk that I'd be locked under the stage again with Bruce Forsyth slashes. But thankfully, this year I was firmly ensconced at the back of the stage throughout. So I wasn't locked anywhere I didn't need to be. I think it went really well. You always, with the awards, it's not so much how well it does on the night. You wait to see what the response is the next day. I was waiting for someone to send us an email being like, why on earth would this happen? Or why would this go wrong? And no one sent any of those emails. So at that point I thought, okay, we're probably safe. We're probably in the clear. And there were some wonderful moments, like when Imelda Staunton came up on stage to pick up Best Performer in a Musical. There was almost an audible gasp in the auditorium, like, oh my gosh, the Queen is here, which was lovely. And then also Andrew Lloyd Webber saying that Starlight Express might not be the best musical in the world, which was really like quite amiably like it's a very down to earth thing for someone to say. Like, I think that was really wonderful.
That was definitely my favourite moment, was Andrew Lloyd Webber saying, and it wasn't so much Andrew Lloyd Webber saying it was the look on Michael Harrison's face as he said it, because Michael Harrison had just spent the best part of 2 years saying to everybody, this is an amazing musical and it has scooped all these What's on Stage Awards. Then its composer gets up and goes, well, it was really just for the kids.
I think that was the quote of the night too. I saw everybody, so many people that I know, that I follow on X, formerly Twitter, from both the UK theatre scene and Americans that I knew who were there, who had bought tickets, were talking about it.
And I thought the other glory was that we heard so many new musicals and extracts from musicals that had been performed during the year, which was great. I love the sort of medley of all the shows that had showcase performances or concert performances. But to hear things like Becoming Nancy and The Artist, which have only been seen outside London and for fairly limited runs, that felt incredibly exciting to have a glimpse of what might be coming up fairly soon.
It was, for me, almost a showcase for, hey, these regional productions are so cool. Any producers in the room, why don't you get behind them to bring them into the West End? So it would be so wonderful to see the artist now get a life in London after being so dazzlingly original on stage at the Palladium. So yeah, we were just almost a stepping stone in their long and fruitful lives. But we're firmly in the middle of award season, aren't we? And I think that's really the topic for the rest of this episode, the What's on Stage podcast, is going through the different award ceremonies. And, you know, there's quite a strong film focus, but a lot of the films that are making headlines at the moment have a very strong theatrical vein running through them. So it's nice that we can alight on the worlds of film and theatre at the same time.
Well, I just think that the BAFTA Awards, which of course have just happened, were, you know, knocked into a cocked hat by the What's on Stage Awards. But apart from that,
yeah, well, they were actually available for those ones. Yeah.
Yeah, he was quite good as a host. I thought he was great fun. And yeah, really interesting BAFTA Awards, and very much a prelude to an Oscar season that isn't exactly wide open, but has certainly got more exciting than it seemed to be when Emilia Pérez got 13 nominations and everybody just thought that this musical about a trans gangster would sweep up all the awards. And suddenly we're in completely different territory because its star has been cancelled, really.
It has very quickly gone in the other direction.
The story is, in case you have been living on Mars for the past few months, I mean, the story is that they put up some very, very offensive and ill-advised tweet. And so Carla Sofia Gascon is no longer part of Netflix's campaign for the movie, which is really extraordinary because they had become the first trans performer to be nominated in the Best Actress category. And one of the questions about the Oscars on March the 4th is whether they will actually turn up, because they weren't at the BAFTAs in, you know, great sort of extraordinary turn up.
And it should be noted that part of that was Netflix stopping paying for her travel to all of these different award shows, and she would have to do it out of her own pocket, which is kind of the most extraordinary statement you can possibly think of for a movie that was originally thought to be the front runner.
The fact that no one at Netflix, one of the largest entertainment organizations to ever exist, thought, let's scroll through someone's tweets and see what they tweeted 5-6 years ago, or thought, let's just blanket wholesale delete anything that could potentially be a problem, is astounding to me, because it's just utterly ridiculous.
Especially in an era where everything public relations wise is so carefully manufactured, especially during award season where everything is scrutinized. It just boggles the mind how all of that just transpired and kept transpiring for what felt like a month, but was really only 3 or 4 days.
Yeah, I felt in a way that there's a kind of poetic justice involved here, in the sense that I don't mind Emilia Pérez, and I think it is wild and whirring. And of course, it's a musical, which means that there are 2 musicals nominated for Best Picture in the shape of Wicked, which is very obviously a musical, and Emilia Pérez, which is slightly less obviously a musical. Netflix did pick it up because they hoped it would be their offbeat equivalent to Parasite or Everything Everywhere All at Once. And so there was a certain degree, and I say this with some care, legal care, certain degree of cynicism, I think, in the amount of effort that Netflix put into that awards campaign. Certainly, when it got 13 nominations, I was really shocked, because I thought it's a good film. I'm not knocking it as a film, but it's never, ever 13 nominations worth of a good film. And that felt like a juggernaut that had been created by a publicity campaign and everybody wanting to do the right thing, despite the fact that both the Mexicans, where it's set, because it's filmed in France, set in Mexico, Mexicans don't like it much, trans community very divided about it. So it has got issues all along as a film, even without the unfortunate tweets.
Oh, you liked it?
I liked it. I thought it was weird. I agree with Sarah that, you know, were it not for 13 nominations, I probably would have watched it, said, oh, that was interesting, and never given another thought. But in the moment, I was like, oh, this is something that you don't see every day. And I appreciated it for that aspect alone.
That kind of balls to the heart of it. Like, how far are these awards campaigns actually about the quality of the film? Or is it about the quality of the campaign? you could probably make a film about a snail like on the side of a road in Yorkshire, and it might, if with enough money behind it and enough of a narrative and enough spin and enough names attached as producers, you could probably get it to a few Oscar nominations if you tried hard enough. I remember there was that case with, was it Andrea Riseborough when she was nominated that one year? I can't even remember what the name of the film was, and something like it made 30,000 at the box office or something, but she landed an Oscar nomination by sheer virtue of just campaigning really hard herself to get enough Oscar voters over the line. In a way, it kind of reminds me of something like Conclave, where it's nothing to do with, like, it's all about the politics rather than the person or the film. If you get enough votes and you make the shortlist, then well done. But the amount of money and the millions of pounds that gets spent on campaigns, lunches, parties, launches, junkets, all boiling down to one night. If you compare it to last year with Oppenheimer, where that just felt from the off, this was a film that both deserved the awards it got, but also was to some extent probably engineered to be Christopher Nolan's big Oscar-winning film. And he knew that that's probably what he was going to end up with. But it didn't feel contrived when he did actually end up winning. It just felt like it was inevitable to some extent. And you're almost shocked when he didn't win something, or when Cillian Murphy didn't win something, as opposed to when they did. Whereas compare that to this year, it feels as though anyone could win anything.
There are a couple of categories this year that seem like a lock at this point, which is Kieran Culkin for A Real Pain and supporting actor. Kieran Culkin, who at the same time he will be attending the Oscars, will be on Broadway playing Ricky Roma and Glengarry Glen Ross.
Which is such an exciting prospect, isn't it? I mean, my goodness.
Sort of perfect for that role. Glengarry, not a play that I sort of ever want to see again for personal reasons, but I'm excited for this cast. I'm actually very excited for this production. I think him and Zoe Saldana for Emilia Pérez are probably the closest thing we have to locks these days.
One of the things I am intrigued by, obviously, that in the BAFTA, Zoe Saldana did win, and Emilia Pérez won Best Film Not in the English Language.
Yeah.
I am interested how strong the backlash is in the States and whether anything can dislodge her from that award. And certainly I suspect that it won't win Best International Picture.
No, I think that will go for I'm Still Here.
Walter Sellers is making his comeback with a very earnest, very serious film, beautifully acted film about the disappeared in Brazil.
It sort of tells the story similar to what Emilia Pérez does about a subject that you don't really know about in daily life, but I think it does it in a much more earnest and less cynical way than Emilia Pérez does.
I think Oscar voters will be more comfortable with that. I think having given it all those nominations, they're going to get very cold feet. On the other awards, Adrien Brody obviously won the Best BAFTA for Best Actor for an extraordinary performance in The Brutalist, which is a film that absolutely relies on him. It's a film about a Hungarian refugee architect, and without Adrien Brody playing that part, I think it would struggle, because it's so focused on his story and his suffering. Do you think he's going to do it at the Oscars as well? Do we feel that that's going to happen?
I think he will. If I were an Oscar voter, I would vote for Coleman Domingo for Sing Sing. Because he's one of our Broadway guys. I've known him for a very long time, both as an actor, artist, and as a person. And I think everything about Sing Sing is I think Sing Sing is my favorite movie of the year, because I think it's just a beautiful story about redemption through the arts and theater. And if I had to choose, it would be him. But I think Adrien Brody just carries The Brutalist, and it would not work without him.
The thing about Sing Sing, and going back to my point about campaigns, is that I think if Sing Sing hadn't had that summer release that it did, and had come out in Oscar season, and it had that re-release over Christmas, which was well timed, it could have really been one of the front runners. And it didn't get nominated for Best Picture, which I think was really sad, because it is a unmissable film, and like David said, it speaks to the overwhelming power of the arts to both rehabilitate and to form connection. I'm so glad that Coleman Domingo did get that recognition, but with the Oscars you always feel like which category might swim against the tide. because Adrien Brody has just swept through every single award ceremony so far. The only thing that could stop him is there was, again, not on the same level as Emilia Pérez, but there was a bit of a hit piece about AI and its use during the film for creating some background scenes. And I think also they used it to tweak the Hungarian pronunciation of Brody and Felicity Jones in some of their performances. And that created a bit of a stink very briefly, but I don't think it will derail Adrien Brody's performance. Again, it sort of reminds me of Conclave, where they're bringing up all this dirt on these films to try and stop them from winning, and it's exactly what happens in Conclave, which I love.
Yeah, I mean, I, like both of you, adored Sing Sing and thought it is, for anyone who loves theatre and performance, it is such an empowering and moving film. And Colman Domingo, just adore. I mean, I spent a lot of a previous podcast going on and on and on. I've got this sneaking and completely unwarranted suspicion that Timothée Chalamet is still in with a shout for Bob Dylan, because I think he's good in it. That's a film, A Complete Unknown, that really surprised me because it made me think better of Bob Dylan in some ways. It made me think he was a more interesting figure than I'd felt he was. And it also made me feel better about the rock star biopic because it's a more complex picture of a pop star. So I did like it. And I just wonder, he's run a good and elegant and very smiley campaign. It must be hard for him sitting on the front row at BAFTA and having jokes made about him, but not winning the award. And I've just got, if I were a betting woman, and I'm really not, I might just put a very small amount on him. I also would put quite a large amount now on Mikey Madison winning Best Actress. I thought Demi Moore had got that as a lock, but there's suddenly a lot of love for Anora.
I watched it last night and I absolutely I loved it so much. I think I've been so late because of the WhatsOnStage Awards, actually committing to watching films, because I'll normally spend evenings frantically sending emails to Westminster Council. But it was such a good film. And I was like, oh, it's a Cinderella story. It's an inverted Cinderella story with horrific implications. And I thought she was so brilliant in it as well, because that role could have been so two-dimensional. But I really just so cared for her.
It's such a great New York movie.
Yes, but also New York that you don't see very often.
My wife grew up right around there, and we were watching it, and I was like, "Where is that? Where is that?" And she's like, "That's the fame. That's all of those places are famous."
So where exactly is it set? Because it is in New York. I mean, it's a story of a lap dancer who gets involved in with the son of a Russian billionaire. But the great main chunk of it is set in a really unfamiliar New York to tourists. It's not a place I knew at all. And yeah, so where is all that?
It's a neighborhood called Brighton Beach, which is a very Russian-American neighborhood in Brooklyn near Coney Island, all the way. It's my in-laws live out there. Whenever we go visit them, the drive could either take 20 minutes on a good day in traffic or over an hour in traffic, which tells you everything that you need to know about its location in relation to where I live. But it's, it's close to New Jersey. Right. It's close to the water, and, it's by the iconic boardwalk and theme park in Coney Island that no one really thinks about when they're coming to New York, because they all want to see Times Square and Rockefeller Center and all of that sort of thing. But take the last stop on the D train and you'll be there.
Right. And Sean Baker, the director, and it makes it look so enticing, really. And I, too, loved Anora. I saw it late, and I think it would now be my favourite to win Best Picture. I also think it must be the favourite to win Best Picture because it's won the Screenwriters Guild and it's won Directors Guild and Producers Guild, all of which are kind of good indicators of ultimate victory. But it is an astonishing film. There is something about it that is, it seems very straightforward, and yet it's unlike anything I've ever seen.
Yeah, and it's so unbearably sad.
You just wait for someone to redeem themselves the whole time, and you're just on the edge of your seat thinking, please just commit, connect, please just do it. And then I don't want to spoil the ending.
No, you can't spoil it. You can't spoil it because it's magic.
Yeah.
It's a magic ending. It's possibly the best last scene in film. I think,
Ooh.
almost ever. I think it's an astonishing final scene. It takes you in a completely different place than you expected to be. So that would be my choice, though I'm fond of The Brutalist. What do you think of The Brutalist, Alex?
Well, that's unfortunately one I have not had time to see. This is also why we brought David in, because he has seen almost every single film, apart from Dune Part 2. Dune, which Sarah and I are going to have some thoughts about later. But yes, David, what do you think of The Brutalist?
Yeah, I dug it. It had me. It felt like you were watching just a really long play. And I think the intermission really helped. And I'm not one who has the patience to sit through. Like, I won't go to the movies mostly because I spend most of my time in dark rooms anyway. But my wife let me see it at like 4:00 on a Friday afternoon. She did bedtime that night for our toddler, just so I could go see this movie because I really wanted to see it. And it's a long commitment, with trailers and everything. I don't know how it is in the UK, but with trailers, there was like 45 minutes of trailers before this 3.5-hour movie started. But no, it really had me from the first second. I think part of that is the score is so compelling.
Which won the BAFTA for score, didn't it? It is an amazing score by Daniel Blumberg. I mean, just fabulous and evocative and, yeah, powerful.
It makes me so upset that Guy Pearce hasn't gotten more awards traction, because I think he also is the secret weapon of that movie. As the ostensible villain who starts off with, I guess, one series of motivations and then takes a complete turn in the back half of the film that you see coming if you squint a little bit, but it overwhelmingly surprises you.
That is always the tragic thing about awards. If you, like us, spend a lot of time judging performance, because particularly in the supporting categories, you very often feel that a front runner establishes themselves early and that all the other performances are equally rich and detailed. I mean, you look at that Best Supporting Actor list, you've got Yuri Borisov, who's astonishing in Anora. You've got Guy Pearce, who I agree with you is amazingly subtle in The Brutalist, in a part that could not have been subtle. Jeremy Strong, who's great as Roy Cohn in The Apprentice, and then Edward Norton, who in many ways is the best thing about A Complete Unknown. So and yet Kieran Culkin is obviously brilliant, totally deserving, but it's the frustration. And when everybody says, oh, we're all winners, that's not quite the truth, and that in the quiz that you do in 20 years' time, you won't be asked to runner-up in the Best Supporting Actor category. But it is the frustration. I love The Brutalist. I love the way that you say it's a bit like watching a play. I think that's true. And what's interesting about it dynamically is that it is like watching a play. The story unfolds like a theatrical experience, but it's shot in VistaVision, which is a format that's not been used since the late 60s, I don't think. And I think that possibly means that it might win Best Cinematography. Though in that category, Alex, it will come up against Dune, and perhaps we should have our argument about Dune now, because I can tell you this, Dune is not going to win Best Picture.
Well, I definitely think that of all the films that came out in the last 12 months, I'd say Dune was the one that I enjoyed the most. And that's a big... I don't think it'll win. I'm glad it's been recognised. I don't think it's been recognised enough. I also think the Academy has a strange aversion to sci-fi unless it's, palatable sci-fi, like in Everything Everywhere All at Once. They don't like space operas, at least don't anymore. And they don't like sequels very much. So there was already that hoo-ha around Best Original Score and how Hans Zimmer wasn't eligible for Dune Part 2, even though I'd say the Dune Part 2 score was superior to the Dune Part 1 score. I also think that material is just fundamentally unadaptable. What was written in that original Dune novel was just so beyond the pale of anything you should ever be able to see on film. And the fact that Denis Villeneuve has done it is probably one of the most impressive things I've seen a director do in many, many a year. I think this will go down as the 2020s response to Lord of the Rings. The fact that he wasn't recognised for Best Director is, to be honest, a bit of a travesty. I just think that the vision that he had in being able to take Arrakis and turn it into something that not only was serviceable in the way that someone like David Lynch did back when the original film was made, but made it really compelling and enthralling and visually spectacular, but then also to make this really contrived storyline about mixed heritage, like dictators taking over the universe because there's a strange messiah complex that's been fostered over many generations on this desert planet that's a little bit like Tatooine but isn't. It's just incredible that he's managed to pull it off. I think this film could have gone so horribly wrong, and the fact it didn't is impressive. And I know that the Academy Awards aren't there to celebrate people who could have gone wrong but don't. But I still think that what he pulled off was amazing. But you dislike it, Sarah, and
I
I'm going to let you
disliked it
have the floor.
No, I'm going to ask David what he thinks. He can be the judge. I just thought it was visually amazing. I'd be really happy if it swept up quite a lot of visual awards. And I do agree that it's terrible that it wasn't nominated for Best Director, because if it's anything, it's beautifully directed. But I just was bored. I mean, I'm just bored. And then when I watched the whole thing, because I had watched part 1 as well, so I watched part 2 thinking this story was going to end, not being part of any of the Dune universe. So I thought, oh, great, well, I'll find out what happens in the end. And then I don't. So I really stropped around.
But I think, but I think you do find out what. I don't think it needed a third part, because there is that fundamental tragedy of, he loses himself to the expectation of who he could be, and at that point he dies essentially at the end. That's my grand theory about it, is that you do see him die, and then the figure that replaces him isn't him, it's this other sort of like tyrannical superpower being. And that for me I think you could easily end the films there, and I imagine the studio says no, we need the third one, we need the trilogy.
Yeah, I think he's going to do the third one. I think
they might even do a fourth. There's discussion about keeping the Dune franchise going, so we can keep duking this one out for many years when Dune Part 6 wins Best Picture in 2035. So I guess the other big franchise blockbuster success that has been picking up all the noms was Wicked, which I know we've discussed quite considerably on a previous episode of the podcast. Do we think Wicked will come away with any Oscars? And if not this year, do you think Wicked could come away with any Oscars next year?
I would venture a guess and say probably Paul Tazewell's costume design. I would think maybe the production design. I don't think Cynthia or Ariana are winning, at least for this one, and I don't think Best Picture is in its sights. I think the biggest award is knowing that they've created just as successful a film as they have a Broadway show.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess time will tell if Wicked Part 2 can do anything, but I'm inclined to agree with David. It's just going to pick up a couple of smaller awards, and I don't know, really. It is always the problem with the Oscars that they don't necessarily reward the films that people have gone to. It's been hugely popular, and it's interesting, I suppose, comparing with Wizards of Oz, which of course did pick up a bucket load of Oscars. And I think at that time you look at the way the studios worked, the way the Oscars worked, and there was a much closer correlation between popularity in the cinema and popularity at the Oscars. Now there is definitely a division. And whether that gets redressed when Wicked Part 2 comes out, I don't know.
I want to throw just a couple of things out there for The Substance, which is probably one of my favorite, up there. It's really up there this year.
Okay.
I really loved it. It's so gross. It's so weird, but...
when was the last time that a body horror film was nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars? And I know it's not just a body horror film. That's very reductive of me. It is a satire of, ageism in Hollywood. But ultimately, that's the direction it ends up in, isn't it?
I just thought it was fun. And fun just always sounds like the worst thing you could say about something. But it was just one of the... It was like, I didn't know what to expect. I watched it without reading much about it, except knowing that there's this incredible monster element to it. And... I just thought it was a delight from start to finish.
I liked it till about 3/4 of the way through. And then the more body horror it gets, the more I found that it just completely left me. Partly because you lose the performances. I mean, I do think Demi Moore is great in it. And Margaret Qualley is equally good. So I'm really interested to watch them. And obviously the more that the special effects take over. I like the satire. I thought it was really smart. And I like the fact it's directed by a woman, the only woman, Coralie Fargo, on the Best Directing roster.
And then Nickel Boys, which is a movie that not many people are talking about. And I thought for the uniqueness of the filmmaking alone that more people, like that it would have gotten more nominations, that more people would have recognized it.
Nickel Boys is the one I haven't seen, so we've all not seen one. That is a campaign that hasn't worked. Because not only is it not doing as well as it clearly should, having read endlessly about it, and so many people admire it so much, it's actually really hard to see as well. It's in very few cinemas, been chasing it around to try and see it.
That's how it is here with Hard Truths, which did not get any love. And I thought for sure after seeing it on the screener that they sent me, because I talked to Mike Lee and Marianne Jean-Baptiste, that I thought for sure after seeing her performance, she would have gotten nominated, and knowing that she had sort of swept a lot of the critics awards too. But no one knew how to see it here in the States. It's probably, is it more visible in the UK?
It is more visible, but I think that was the surprise at the BAFTAs, was that it didn't get any love, and that she didn't. If there was going to be a surprise whereby Demi Moore didn't win Best Actress, I think that the thought was that Marianne Jean-Baptiste would win it. And the fact that she didn't, I think, really was a shock.
My thoughts on The Substance are that it kind of reminds me to some extent of The Whale, where you have a really beloved performer who has a few years in the wilderness and then comes back to great critical acclaim. And it's kind of like a Sunset Boulevard thing of like, it's a return kind of situation, where Brendan Fraser for The Whale in 2023 picking up the award, now Demi Moore having a similar revivification of their career in the context of The Substance. And it's almost like the film is secondary to the story of her return, although I think that there is more to The Substance than there was to The Whale.
I think she will win Best Actress in America, probably.
I think she will too.
On the subject of accessing films and being able to see them, this is something that you compare to the Olivier's or the Tonys, where it feels more egalitarian. If a show has had a limited run, all the voters are likely to have been able to see it because it plays same night, same time, same cast. Therefore, like, the campaigns operate very differently. So it's something that's kind of alien to us, because we're always the ones that can actually sit there on the opening nights and form opinions on the front runners for theatre awards. That isn't necessarily the case for film awards, because there are films that will sweep the board amongst Academy voters that the large body of the public might have not been able to see. Whereas at least with theatre-going audiences, they're normally quite switched on before these awards to know, what the big winners might be. So whatever comes up at this year's Olivier Awards will likely have already made headlines when it opened in the West End. Whereas sometimes films can sort of like jettison their way to Oscar success without ever really leaving that much of a footprint when they had their cinematic releases.
The other point about voters, and I think the point about the awards season, is that as films gather momentum, voters who are faced with watching an awful lot of films concentrate on the front runners. And I think that's also slightly what happened to Nickel Boys. I think people maybe just think, well, I've got to watch The Brutalist and it's 3.5 hours long. I've got to watch Conclave. I've got to watch these movies. And then the ones that are just, if you like, in your peripheral vision start to drop off votes because people just haven't seen them, I suspect. And you can never really absolutely prove that. But I wonder if there was any way of making it so that if you were going to vote in a category, you had to have watched all of the long list or something. I mean, it's an interesting, thought, really, of making it a level playing field.
We haven't discussed it at length yet, but I think my favourite is the one that picked up the BAFTA, and quite a few BAFTAs, was Conclave.
Yeah.
I love that film. I think the fact that you set a film in the Vatican City and make it look like it's set in the halls of the Kremlin is so genius. And it's directed by Edward Berger, who did All Quiet on the Western Front, which was wildly different, but surprisingly feels like it's of a similar vein, especially with the use of the score. I just absolutely adored it. I think it's a Volker Bertelmann score that it's like that creeping sense of dread, pulling these cardinals apart and finding all of the hidden secrets that they have buried away. And then also, I think, has one of the most surprising final twists of any films that I definitely didn't see coming. I genuinely think that it could win and actually be a win that everyone will be like, you know what, that's classic. Yeah, I do. I think especially after the BAFTAs, I think that it's played a really strong game. I don't think there's any chance of it getting anything other. Maybe it could get one of the screenplay wins.
Yeah, I think that's another lock, actually. I think he'll get, Peter Straffen will get best adapted screenplay.
It was so funny when he said that he was so happy that Robert Harris had let him basically turn it into Mean Girls. I think he said that on stage at the BAFTAs because it's based on the Robert Harris novel. It's just brilliant, a brilliant film.
What do you think, David?
I was just sort of bored. I know it's sacrilege in the worst possible way, but I was just, I like the acting.
Ralph Fiennes is great.
I will not begrudge Ralph Fiennes any of his nominations. I love Stanley Tucci. I will watch John Lithgow read the phone book. Lucy and Miss Maddie was wonderful. It was Isabella Rossellini, who I think could be a sneaky winner of supporting actress.
Yes, if it goes wrong for Saldana, I definitely think she's the one who'll sneak in.
Since Isabella Rossellini is actually a supporting part and Zoe Saldana is the star of Emilia Pérez, ostensibly.
She's the lead, yeah.
No, I like Conclave. But I don't see it winning Best Picture. I think it's a film of textures. He's good at textures. He it's the same thing with All Quiet on the Western Front, that you feel you are in the world. But I can't really see it as a Best Picture, but
it won at the BAFTAs, though. You know, if the BAFTAs liked it, I know they like their own. That's why, but still,
they like Edward Berger. I mean, it's Burgess, so it did win lots of. All Quiet on the Western Front, I think, won 11.
Yeah, that
BAFTAs,
was like cleaned up, didn't it?
Didn't actually win many Oscars, but we'll see. I want to ask David a question about Wallace and Gromit, because Wallace and Gromit is up for Best Animated Feature, but it's up against Inside Out and The Wild Robot. The Inside Out, I think, is the most successful Hollywood release this year. I think its gross is, well, it probably isn't because of Wicked, but it's certainly up there. Yeah. It's the most successful animated movie. And Wild Robot, also hugely popular. Can Wallace and Gromit do it?
I still don't think enough people here know what Wallace and Gromit is. I would vote for Wallace and Gromit. I thought it was fun. I don't think it has a chance here.
No, I wondered that, because I don't think it's got a chance really, but I'd be inclined to think it might be The Wild Robot.
Oh, I love The Wild Robot. The Wild Robot was beautiful. I went to the cinema by myself. I think my wife was out with some friends, and I was just sat there at the back of the cinema crying over this duck that was sort of like flying south for winter. And I was like, what had happened? Is alchemic, and I think the appreciation for nature is one of the most important things you can teach a young viewer, and to do that through the wonder of animation is so incredible.
Did Wallace and Gromit air in the UK was it available in the UK around the same time as the Gavin and Stacey finale?
Yeah, like Christmas.
Because I feel like I saw a lot of people talking about the two of them in tandem, and it just seemed like there was a lot of good-natured nostalgia for both of them.
Exactly. It was British Christmas 2024.
I'd say that was probably the greatest moment for BBC One's programming of the 21st century, in terms of Gavin and Stacey became one of the most watched TV episodes of all time, and Wallace and Gromit, I think, ended as the most watched animated film since records began on British television. So between the two of them, the BBC was cleaning up on Christmas Day, and rightly so, because they're both brilliant episodes of television or films. It's funny how in the UK it was aired on television as a one-off special, and then it starts winning like loads of awards as best film, when in the UK it isn't even really a film.
But perhaps not the Oscars, I suspect. So
It'd be so cool if it did. Anyway, yes.
I think it won't. But if on that slightly somber note, Wallace and Gromit, we probably ought to bring this foray into the film world to an end and say thank you to David Gordon for joining us. Next week, Alex and I will be back on stage in a very firm manner discussing star casting, having watched a lot of stars take to the West End stage.
Yeah, Richard II, Much Ado About Nothing. It's a busy time for the big names doing Shakespeare as well.
Indeed. So that will be our theme next week. But thank you so much, David.
Thank you for having me. I hope to speak to you again.
We hope so too. So for now, it's goodbye from me, Sarah Crompton.
And a goodbye from me, Alex Wood. Make sure you like, follow, subscribe, or leave a rating wherever you can for the What's on Stage podcast. We'll be back next week. Have a great one.